You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hello there, and welcome back to Force Perspectives for part 4 of our Obi-Wan Kenobi Retrospective. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and with me, as always, for our Obi-Wan Kenobi Retrospective, my stalwart and steadfast co-host, Marty Aleman.
Hello there.
Marty, you and I, we just didn't record a whole podcast. Now, not this podcast. Okay, so I want everybody to understand, not an episode of Force Perspectives. We didn't talk about Star Wars basically at all, but you and I have been on this call for like an hour.
Yeah,
more than an hour and change. About an hour and 15. And talked about a million other things. We talked about life, we talked about work, we talked about but then we got into the Flash, and at that point I couldn't help it. Look, I know this is a Star Wars podcast and we're going to get into Star Wars in a second, but I have to take an opportunity with the platform that I have to warn everyone possible. Don't see this movie.
Yeah.
Don't see this movie. And I'm not going to go into details or elaborate, but like I did before recording, I did warn Marty, like, don't see this movie. Right. And I think I made a pretty good case for why you shouldn't see The Flash. Right.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to get into details here. Full disclosure, the whole reason why we took a week off was because I took a week off of life.
Yeah.
Went to California, had some good times, and so I've had no time to actually go to the movies. And I guess I dodged a bullet maybe by this, and saved some money. Didn't take the family out to see The Flash, and
definitely don't take kids to it. Definitely don't take kids to it, because it's not a kid-friendly movie. And that's one thing that, like, I have not heard a lot of people talk about. Kids under 10, not appropriate. There is stuff towards the end of this movie that it's like, it's not cool. And again, I can't get into spoilers because I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but that is actually going to go out to see it, and that isn't going to listen to me, because there are those people, but not appropriate for kids, man. Like, I'm so glad that I didn't take Cara to see this movie.
Maybe especially if you have daughters, right? Don't take them.
Yeah. It's like it is not an appropriate film for kids. Yeah, don't see it. I'll tell you what you do with your money instead. Just go see Spider-Man again. Like, come on. That movie's fantastic. Just go see that again, or even, like, I don't know, go see that Transformers movie. Maybe I've heard that it's also very bad, but it's not this bad. Or just save your money, or there's some good movies coming out soon. So
yeah, I'm kind of on a Indiana Jones kick right now, and I don't care what anyone says about that movie. That movie premiered in Cannes, and there was mixed reviews and whatnot, but at least for me, I really don't care. I cannot wait, and I have my tickets ready for Thursday, so I can't.
Yeah, we're going Friday at noon, because we're taking Cara to go see it, and yeah, absolutely. I
taking my daughter too, man.
Can't wait for that.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, and that one's like that. Now we're back on topic. We talk about Indiana Jones. It's Lucasfilm. Film. We're on topic, but yeah, I agree. Like, the mixed reviews out of Cannes were disappointing, to say the least. Sorry. But so I was a little crestfallen when the bad reviews started cropping up. But then after the premiere, a bunch of people whose opinions I trust, who I value, have said very positive things. some folks there's a couple of people that I follow on Twitter that have seen it more than once and are
Ooh,
like, better the second time, guys. So for
awesome.
me, it's like, I think we maybe mentioned this previously. I like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Like, I like, it drags a little bit in the third act. It gets a little bit long in the tooth, but overall, I think it's a really good movie. I like what they did. You can hear me talk a lot about that actually on the Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark Perfect 10 episode that we just released. Me and Cheryl talking about that. Cheryl, who's like the biggest Indiana Jones fan that I know,
Oh, I
which
gotta
is
listen to
saying a
that.
lot because like, I'm a pretty big indie fan. You're a pretty big indie fan, right? Like, we know some people who are pretty big indie fans, but Cheryl is like, she is obsessed with Indiana Jones. Um, so we did an episode of Perfect 10 about Raiders, sort of in the lead up to Dial of Destiny, and but yeah, I like, people whose opinions I value are saying that it's a good movie. So I'm back on the hype train of like, okay, well then hopefully I enjoy it. I think I'm gonna enjoy it. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, so I'm excited. I'm very excited for Friday to see this movie. I and we'll report back. We'll report back on our part 5 episode. We'll which is fitting because we'll talk about part 5 of Obi-Wan, but we'll also talk
Aw,
about Indiana Jones 5. I
kind of.
That'll work. But I that's enough about indie for now. That's no more about the Flash ever again. Just do not see that movie. But
Don't say that.
I what we are going to talk about is the fact that sort of fortuitously, as we're in the middle of our Obi-Wan retrospective, Marvel and Disney have announced that they're doing an Obi-Wan Kenobi comic book that basically like retells the story of of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, but that there will be like some sort of additional stuff in it. So
Yeah,
um
just got
yeah,
announced a couple days ago, right?
yeah, and so it's going to be a 6-issue miniseries written by Jody Houser with pencils from Salvador LaRocca. Jody Houser, which when we get into the episode, we'll talk about it. Like, or not this episode. Jody Houser was one of the writers on the show, though, wasn't she?
Yeah, I do believe she was on this episode. Let me
Yeah,
fact check that
I think
now.
maybe it was last week's episode. It might have been the last episode that she was, because I don't see her on this one when I look at IMDb.
Oh, okay,
But
interesting because I could have sworn I saw her name today, but
yeah, but Salvador LaRocca on pencils, like, come on, Salvador LaRocca is one of the best artists in comics. So
right.
this is actually like, this is one that I'm very excited about. I probably won't pick it up in issues. I'll wait for like a hardcover trade paperback, but well, I guess it won't be a trade paperback, but like the hardcover graphic novel of the 6 issues. But I will definitely be checking this out at some point. Yeah, and I think that there's maybe, are these covers by? There's a bunch of covers. I think at least one of these is by Phil. Yeah, one of them's by Phil Noto, who Phil Noto, awesome stuff, awesome stuff.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
Um, his work on the Poe Dameron series, so
Oh,
good.
I love the Poe Dameron series.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like, there are some beautiful covers that they've shown off so far, and I saw an interior earlier today, one of the pages that basically like, r- there were no word bubbles on it. There was no writing on it. It was just the art, but it's sort of recapping what happens in Star Wars Rebels between Obi-Wan and Maul. So
Cool.
like, that sold me. I was, because at first I was kind of like, do we really need this? Do we need an adaptation of the Disney Plus series? But then it was like, they're gonna go like the extra mile. Like, they're gonna add some stuff in. So it's like a live action adaptation. I mean, it's a comic book, right? So it's art, but it's like but it's in the style of live action, showing us what happened in Star Wars Rebels. So,
I gotta find
and
this now.
we'll get some inner monologue, obviously, of Obi-Wan, and some insight into what was going on in his head when that happened. So, like, that's it. That's all I needed. I'm in. But as I've talked about on many a podcast, that is my favorite fight in all of Star Wars. Like, that's my favorite lightsaber battle in all of Star Wars. It is bar none, like the best. The number two would be Empire, Luke, and Vader, and it, like, for me, it's a distant second. So that tells you what I'm talking about here. I know everybody else goes to the prequels, right? Everybody else goes to like the fancy fighting. For me, it's like, if you can't tell, it is about the emotional content, right? Like, that's like lightsaber duels first and foremost are about the conflict between two characters. Whether or not they can flip those lightsabers around like crazy, irrelevant to me. Irrelevant. A lightsaber is cool enough on its own. Cause yeah, like for me, it's like I can tell you right now, my top five is like Rebels, Obi-Wan versus Maul, right? Empire, Luke versus Vader, and then Return of the Jedi, Luke versus Vader, and then Obi-Wan and Vader on the Death Star, and then Obi-Wan and Vader and Obi-Wan. That's my top five. Um, like the prequels don't even enter into it. unless you want to sort of count the Vader and Obi-Wan duel in Obi-Wan, but yeah, man, I'm an OT lightsaber duelist, purist, I guess, a lightsaber duel purist.
I like duelist purist, actually. That's
Duelist purist, yeah,
I
the
like that. That sounds good.
doublist. I love the prequels, and I love the Clone Wars, and I love so many of those fights. I mean, like the fight between Maul and Ahsoka in season 7 of Clone Wars is incredible. It's incredible. But again, like, see, I catch myself because I'm like, it's such a good fight. And I'm like, but why is it such a good fight? It's such a good fight because of the emotional content of it, right? Because of the, like,
the scene
I
before.
know what Palpatine is doing. If you join me, we can defeat him together, right? Like, that's why I love that fight, not because of the choreography. The choreography is phenomenal, right? But like, any franchise, any story can have a cool sword fight, right? Like, here's a great example. The sword fight at the end of Pirates of the Caribbean, I think it's 2, right? Is the one where they're in like the wheel and they're fighting or whatever.
Right.
Amazing choreography. At that point in that movie, I do not care about any of the characters anymore. Like, that movie is so bad. That 1 and 3 are like so bad that like I totally lose any love that I have for the characters over the course of those films, because it's just so long, and that by the time that they're having this awesome choreographed duel, it's like, I'm just like, I don't care about any of this. So it doesn't matter how good your choreography is. If I don't care about your characters, it doesn't matter. All of that to say that I'm excited about this comic book. How about you?
No, I'm excited. I haven't picked up any of the retellings or the what are these called? Just
Like adaptations or whatever.
adaptations. I couldn't get the word out.
Yeah.
I picked up. I remember Rogue One, and that was pretty cool because it actually had some additional material. But I never picked up like any of the other ones after that, and I knew that the Mandalorian ones were coming out, and those looked interesting. But I never, again, basically after my second daughter was born, I stopped buying comics.
Oh, dude, I didn't stop buying comics, but I haven't read any of them, and I just have stacks all over my house of like, and I'll get motivated every once in a while, and it'll be like, and I'll go through like 3 volumes of Ninja Turtles in like a weekend or
Right.
something. Like, I did that a little while ago, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm like back into reading comics, and then life got busy again, and I'm like, I have a stack of 6 volumes of Ninja Turtles that I need to get through. And there's more that have come out that I haven't picked up yet, but that are sitting in my saver at my comic shop.
Oh yeah. When
And
I
then
got
like
to oh
I give Marvel Unlimited their money every year. I give them I throw I don't know, it's like $80 Canadian or something like that at
oh
them.
do you?
Um, and then like I don't read anything. But they're there, and I know that they're there, and there's comfort in the fact that like all of those Star Wars comics and all of those Spider-Man and X-Men comics are there. And then every once in a while, again, I will get motivated, and I read through all of the X-Men House and Powers of X in like a weekend, right?
Right.
Like, it's so, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible comics reader these days, but I It's the worst thing is that I've got American Born Chinese sitting on my desk. I can see it right now. And it's sitting at the bottom of the stack, and it shouldn't. It should be at the top of the stack because I really want to watch the show, but I want to read the book before I watch the show. So I haven't started watching it yet, which is terrible because like then Disney Plus is going to be like, oh, we should just remove this from the service. So I need to read that, and then I need to watch the show because apparently the show is fantastic.
Yeah, I got to check that out.
So
I got to a point for me that I really started started getting phone calls from my comic book shop saying like, "Hey, your pull box is kind of full. Are you going to come over here and pick this up?"
yeah.
And it got to the point where I'm just like, and then to be honest, like a couple of my guys that used to work there for like 10 years, they quit and everything. So it was just like, all right, well, I think it's an end of an era for me. I should just
Yeah.
cash
Tap
my
out.
chips, tap
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Comic books are a hard thing. It's I I just want to assure everybody. Yes, I have Marvel Unlimited for Marvel Comics because there are too many. And sticking with series with Marvel is just a surefire way to get burned. Um, but I still get plenty of physical comics from my local comic shop because everybody should support their local comic shop if you can financially. There are actually a lot of instances where if I really like something that I read on Marvel Unlimited, I go and I buy like a hardcover of it, especially with the Star Wars stuff. So that's just my PSA for comic shops and comic shop owners. I just want to make sure that everybody knows I am not advocating for going fully digital. It's not good for the industry. You need to support local comic shops. And the other part is like, you want to know what the good stuff is. The app isn't going to tell you what the good stuff is. The app treats everything the same. No matter if it's a piece of trash or if it's the best comic run you've ever read in your life. But if you walk into a comic shop, there is probably someone there. If it's a good comic shop, there should be someone there that will steer you in the right direction, that will learn your taste and will give you great recommendations. And that is the benefit to a local comic shop. So go pick up your comics at a local comic shop. That's what I say. Like I'll get the hardcover of this Obi-Wan series if one becomes available, or I'll get the trade paperback if that's the only option. But I'm hoping that there's a hardcover because I've got that Kanan Jarrus one, the hardcover for that, and an Obi-Wan Kenobi one will look really great right next to it. I've been on the hunt to try and track down Poe Dameron, but like all my favorite runs in hardcover. But yeah, support your local comic shop if you
Always.
can. It's more expensive than getting comics other ways, uh, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
You want to get into Obi-Wan? You want to get into part 4?
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. Part 4, directed once again by Deborah Chow, written by Joby Harold, Hannah Friedman, and George Lucas is credited here on the IMDb like top line, which
Yeah, I
it's
saw
always
that.
like it's characters and story created by George Lucas. But yeah. When we last left our characters, Obi-Wan was raked across the coals, quite literally, and Leia was captured by Reva, and so we start with Obi-Wan sort of in transit to Jabim to be dunked in the tank. We were wrong. We were like, oh, is this week the flashback when he's in the back to tank? We said that on the last episode. We were wrong. The beginning of the next episode is the flashback. Is the
The,
episode 2 flashback?
the flashback with him and Anakin. That, yeah,
Yeah,
I think again, it's been a year, so it's like you kind of combine these in your head where I
yeah,
know he goes in the back to tank, so I knew he goes in the back to tank in this episode, but the actual flashback happens in
yeah,
episode 5. Yeah,
yeah. So he does go in the back to tank, and we do get voiceover flashbacks
sweet.
of episode 3 and of what happened in the previous episode. We get sort of a few snippets of dialogue as Obi-Wan is healing.
So both episodes 3s.
Yeah. And but yeah, so then he pops out of the tank and is like, "Where's Leia?" And then we cut to Leia, who is being held in the Fortress Inquisitorius by Reva, and Reva wants to know where they were going, and Leia won't give her any information. Uh, I love it. I love the beginning of that scene when it's like, uh, "You can't hold me here. I'm a princess of Alderaan." All of that. So it's like very Leia stuff. It's so good. It's very the Imperial Senate will not sit still for this, right? Like it's that same attitude that she has in A New Hope. I love it.
Yeah, good.
Every chance that Vivien Lyra Blair has to embody that character, she just nails it. She does such a good job. I don't know, man. Like people who had anything negative to say about this show back when it was airing, or like still like do at this point, like I can't understand them. Like we do not come from the same planet, because for me it's like Carrie Fisher was, we talked about this I think in the first episode, right? Carrie Fisher was a singular human being, like that I don't think that we'll ever see the likes of again on this planet. She was so amazing, such an incredible person. And so much of that came through in Leia. And somehow this kid, this small child, just absolutely nails it every time. She's so good. There's not a scene in the show that I go like, is a kid actor or whatever, right? Like I mean, there are definitely moments of like that dialogue's a little bit clunky or whatever, but it's it's never enough. Like it's never at the level to like take you out of it. It's never. It's always, you're just like, well, she's a 10-year-old, right? Like some of the things that she's saying are ridiculous things for a 10-year-old to say. And so it works for me. That like that's my perspective. But
Yeah.
yeah, like there are people out there who like have negative things to say about this performance, and I cannot understand that, because she's just so good. I'm always, every time I watch the show, I'm just blown away with how good she is as this character, and I really want them to tell more Leia stories with her, um, especially like as she gets older. We can play with that even more. So I really hope that Lucasfilm is paying attention to the fans that loved the show and want to see more of that, because Vivien Lyra Blair has recently said that like she would really like to do it. I mean, why wouldn't she, right? But
Totally. Yeah, she's a force to be reckoned with for sure.
yeah.
Um, like you said, I don't feel that knee jerk kind of reaction to when a kid actor usually appears on screen. You know, I believe every moment she's in. That princess line, it has that it's I actually love the line because it has that moment where like, yeah, every 10-year-old girl is a princess, right?
Hmm.
But just the way she delivers it is just like, yeah, no, yeah, she is a princess, and you have her held captive, and just her, she's just so strong in these moments. And we only have so many finite years that she could play this character. I mean, she could of course move on to, if we were to ever keep her past like the age of 19, where Carrie Fisher took the role. But
Yeah.
yeah, I would love to see her in other projects. There's always a part of me that just wants to have them do kind of like a live action version of like not necessarily Tales of the Jedi, but kind of an anthology kind of show where it's just Star Wars
Hmm.
stories, not necessarily in any particular order, but they're just almost like going the Lucas way of telling stories, where they're like quote unquote tone poems, you know of a character going through a struggle and then learning a lesson from that. And so I think she can pull that off. To be honest, I think it'd be fantastic and everything. But yeah, overall, this episode, I mean, the way it starts off with going back to Obi-Wan in the tank, just the cross cutting. I love how they completely took advantage of just modern editing techniques in this show overall.
Hmm.
But they're definitely cross cutting between it's just they're one and the same. It's like they cannot like what I mean by they is Vader and Obi-Wan. It's like once they've had that connection, it's like now they feel each other, especially when they're submerged in, similar, back to tanks and whatnot. And just the cross cutting where you see, the camera angle tilting down from the Anakin's shoulder, and you see like the severed arm is not there, and then it cuts to Obi-Wan's hand. It's just moments like that are just fantastic for me. And it really sets the stage for basically what's kind of like the middle of this series, where now we're starting the next kind of trilogy of these episodes. This is the new arc of the show moving forward. And kind of like what I said last episode, this is I've kind of dubbed it the Obi-Wan A New Hope episode, because, we're dealing with Leia getting rescued. Kenobi is, they had these like moments where they're very similar to the original film, kind of the same kind of nuances, like with, Kenobi distracting stormtroopers. And, you have even like subtle like shots where like when Tala is getting there's that officer that pulls her aside, and there's that quick comm leak shot where, it's almost the same moment as like 3PO, where could he be, shot from the original film. It's just I love those little subtle nods to it. But so yeah, overall getting the story kicked off, it's pretty awesome. And I think after this we get into the planning, right? We get, Obi-Wan, he gets out of the battle tank, and then we start, getting what the mission is, right?
Yeah, and we see him back in the Jedi robes, the borrowed Jedi robes, and he sort of starts pleading with oh man, I can't remember the character's name, Roken. I have to go save Leia, right? And he does eventually sort of appeal to his conscience, and so Roken very reluctly, but in a very like, he's a very heroic character. I like Roken a lot, actually. I'd like to see him in more stories. But he's like, all right, let's go, like let's do it.
He did a quick turn. Like I remember it the first time I saw it, and then did that not necessarily, I don't know if bump is the right word, but like did that like did you focus on that a little bit when he like says like, no, we're not going to do it. All right, we're going to do it.
He's it's I think that Obi-Wan, listen, like Obi-Wan's the negotiator, right? This is one of the things that he's good at. He recognizes immediately that Roken has a reason for being involved. Everybody in the path has a reason for being involved. And so he appeals to it of like, because like the first thing that Roken says is like, listen, like he's like, I need help. And he's like, yeah, you and every kid who can float a rock from here to Coruscant, right? And so like there's like that's a very like practical thing of like, he's like, we're trying to run this network, there are a lot of people in need. And then Obi-Wan sort of appeals to him. I think he sort of just gets that like there's a personal story that like you're this is a front, right? And so he appeals to like his conscience. It's a good person, so he's like, this is what's at stake here, right? Without revealing what's truly at stake. And that's always like the fine line that Obi-Wan has to walk with this stuff, is like, it's not that she's important to me, she is, but she's important to the fate of the entire galaxy. And like he sort of manages to say that without saying that, by making it personal about sort of his story and hers. And then Roken turns around and he's like, and he tells the story about his wife, and he's like, let's go, right? So it's like, it's Obi-Wan, I think, reminds him of why he's doing it. And in that process, there wasn't much to flip, right? Like it didn't take a lot, because why would it take a lot, right? The second, like, we're talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's on a mission, and he needs your help, right?
Right.
So I think that like when Roken first comes in, it's like it's a little bit of the lady doth protest too much, of like he's being that forceful because he's trying really hard not to be he doesn't want to, like, he's like, we do have things that we're doing, we have things that are in process and the things that are important, but I know that, like, I know this guy is gonna ask me. I know, like, this famous Jedi, and I personally get the sense that, like, Quinlan did this to him too, right? Like every time one of these Jedi rolls through, he's got this smooth operation going, no problems. Every time one of these damn Jedi walks in, everything goes like it goes crazy, like it goes off the rails instantly the second an actual Jedi shows up, right? We're trying to save these Force sensitive kids from being murdered just for being who they are, right? But every time, like, I don't know, I think there's more story there. And I wouldn't be surprised if, like, Quinlan also, like, similarly came in and was like, listen, I got this kid and I gotta, and it's like, yeah, every kid is special though. And it's like, yeah, but this kid's like, I'm Quinlan Voss and I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't, like, super important. Right? So it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, but I'm Obi-Wan Kenobi. My mission is actually like what I'm doing could actually save all of the kids in the whole galaxy.
Totally.
So, like, I need your help saving this one kid because it's that important, right? So I don't know. This is kind of the way that I read it. So yeah, it is a little bit of like a real quick 180, but it's also, you're talking about the negotiator. This is what he does, you know.
Yeah. It's interesting because what's also kind of alluded to, and even though um we all know that, she's force sensitive, but it's almost like that's kind of the card he's playing at, like
Mhm.
that's the reason why she's quote unquote special. So like that's why she, without telling him who she actually is and everything. While you were talking, I just had an amazing Disney Plus pitch, and popped in my head, that show that Vivien Lyra Blair can come, kind of pop in and out of. Can we just have a Disney Plus show, Star Wars: The Path, where we have Roken in it, and we have our Jason Momoa as Quinlan coming in there, and we have that dynamic? And wouldn't that be amazing? I don't know.
Yeah.
Can that happen? I just want that to happen now.
Totally. Totally. That would be the perfect way to do it, right? I don't know. I think eventually we'll get stories with the path, more stories with the path, I should say. Um but I think that they're just kind of like trying to figure that out. So
No, of course.
yeah, but as we've talked about multiple times now on this podcast, like a show with Quinlan would be fantastic. Um and yeah, you just gotta get Jason Momoa to sign on. I don't know. If the DC universe tanks, he doesn't have Aquaman to play anymore, so he'll need a new franchise. I can write it if Lucasfilm's looking for somebody. I could write you a Quinlan. Quinlan's not my favorite character. Obviously, Obi-Wan is my favorite character, but and I mean, like, I'll write you the season 2 of Obi-Wan with Obi-Wan and Quinlan. I'll do that for sure.
Hmm.
I could do that. I can. That story is inside me somewhere. I don't know if Disney's ready for it though, because there might be too many sort of uh, uh, the shipper fanfic in me might start to come out a little bit too much. There's a little bit too much sexual tension between those two, but yeah. Anyways, we'll get way off tangent if I go any deeper than that,
Sorry.
but yeah, I would love to see that. Um,
You want to talk about the Fortress
we,
Inquisitors? Or
yeah, we flip back to the fortress and we get the thing of like I Reva is trying to interrogate Leia, and she's just like, is this a staring contest? I love it. It's so good. She's
like,
so good. She's just like, I'm
I
sorry, are
wrote
you
that down
doing
too.
something? Because Reva's doing the Kylo Ren mind uh power thing that she did it to uh uh, uh Haja in the last episode, the one before, the 2 episodes ago, in the
Episode two,
second
yeah.
episode. uh yeah, and so we know that she can do it, and then she's trying to do it to Leia, and Leia's just resisting her, and like with no effort. I think is the best part of it, is that it's like listen, this kid is one of the chosen ones. Like back off. you can't you can't mess with her. But I love it. I love that it's like just we like there's no explanation. There's no like exposition to be like, oh, you're untrained, but you're able to blah 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 blah. And it's like, no, she's Leia. We don't need an explanation for this. It's all the only thing that gets said is like you're strong. I think that's what Reva says. Is just like you're strong. She doesn't even say you're strong in the Force. She just says you're strong. Um, and it's kind of like, and then she changes her tactics a little bit. Reva's all over the place in this episode, and I actually really like it. This was another one of those places where people criticized the character and they were like, she's so inconsistent. And I was like, she's not inconsistent, she's unhinged. She is out of control, right? She's a lot like Kylo Ren. A lot like Kylo Ren in that like she is not a bad person. She is not a bad guy. She has been put into a bad situation and manipulated by the wrong people into thinking that this is her only option, that this is her only choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But her inner conflict is telling her the whole time you're doing the wrong thing. So the way she flips back and forth in this episode between the good cop and the bad cop, like she plays both roles, right? I think is literally both aspects of her, the Jedi and the Inquisitor, fighting with each other. And she's a lot like Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens. She's really, really fighting hard to suppress the light side, but it is a temptation, and eventually she'll succumb to it, right? Like, and I love that. I love that The Force Awakens gave us that perspective of a dark side user being tempted by the light, as opposed to the other way around, which is so much the uh, uh, like that's such a straightforward way of talking about the Force, but then to subvert it and be like, yeah, but here's a, a, a Sith or a Knight of Ren or whatever, or an Inquisitor that is wants to live in the dark side, wants to live in the darkness, but is actually a very good person underneath, and that tendency doesn't go away, right? Light always wins. It always wins out. And balance isn't about the light and the dark being equal. Balance is like balance in the universe is harmony, and it's the dark side isn't always malicious intent, right? Like when we talk about it in The Last Jedi, when Luke explains it and he's like, death that brings new life, right? Like it's it's the circle of life sort of conversation of like, well, the lions eat the antelope, but then the lions die and feed the grass, and the grass grows and the antelopes eat the grass, and then the lion eats the antelope, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's like that is the light side and the dark side, life and death. The problem is that the Sith manipulate the dark side to gain control and power, which is not something that they should have. The Jedi seek to, I mean, when a Jedi is in balance with the Force, when you get one like Qui-Gon, they seek to live in harmony with that. Life and death are irrelevant, right? I we've also got some examples of Jedi in the Jedi Council during the fall of the Republic that honestly, like, they have dark side ambition for the right reason, but absolutely Mace Windu tries to maintain control over the Jedi Order, right? Even Yoda falls into that trap quite a few times over the course of the prequels and the Clone Wars. It's a whole thing
Mm-hmm.
where it's like that is the temptation of the dark side, and that's, I mean, this is why he's called Darth Sidious, because that is the insidious nature of it, is that it infects the Jedi Order through their altruism. They want to protect the galaxy, and in that it's really similar to Tony Stark's storyline in the MCU of like in that effort to protect, they end up trying to control, and control is a path to the dark side. That's one of like that is one of the the tenets of the Sith code, right? Is like that control is what allows them to wield the dark side and break their chains and be free, right? It's very the Sith code is very libertarian, and I always find that immensely humorous, that they're like, this is about freedom, it's about liberty, and no, it's not. It's about control and power. It always is. That's what it always comes back to. And the Jedi wanted that just as much. Like the Jedi of the Old Republic wanted that just as much as the Sith. They just wanted to be the ones in control and with power, and they wanted to do it in order to maintain peace and justice in the galaxy. But like, what's justice? Right? Like, the natural order isn't always just, and it's definitely not always peaceful. So the Jedi is like, we're the keepers of peace and justice in the Old Republic. It's like, what does that mean? You're space cops, and what do we say about cops? You know, it's there's a lot of stuff going on here. What am I talking about at this point? I don't know. We were talking about Reva and the light and the dark inside of her.
I was going to say that what I love is that at least the first time, I believe, where she's trying to interrogate her, she immediately tries
Mhm.
to engage with her by using fear and losing Obi-Wan and telling her that he died in the fire.
Yeah.
And Leia still doesn't waver. She stays true and doesn't give into that fear. And then she's rewarded later on in the episode when obviously he rescues her. So I thought that was interesting. That was actually part of my favorite moment in their back and forth
Mm.
moments in the episodes. I love that going back to that staring contest line. That was great too. But yeah, overall, don't give in to fear, guys.
Yeah. Um, the episode cuts back and forth so many times that it's hard to track what happens where. But at some point, Leia tries to use Lola in some way. She's sort of planning her escape, and
Mm.
Reva catches wind of this and takes Lola, which will be important later. But Obi-Wan and Tala hatch a plan to get into the fortress, and so they've got this whole thing worked out with some of Rokin's people, and so Tala goes in through security or whatever, and we've got that great scene of whether or not her clearance is gonna check out, and the security officer comes over and is like, "Oh, I'm in charge of security," and they have their whole back and forth, which is a really good scene. And
Very
then
good.
Tala is in like the control room thing, talking to Obi-Wan, talking him through stuff, and I love we get the aqua rebreather thing and him swimming down, very very much a callback to the Phantom Menace. um but
But it feels like that's a very unique Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan thing that it happened in Phantom Menace, Revenge of the Sith, and it's like he has to
yeah,
have that breather in some form or another in this show, and he got it back, which is pretty cool. But
and
yeah,
that swimming, there is something about his motion specifically that it's like, I don't know, I think I could pick out Obi-Wan from another Jedi swimming in those robes.
I never thought about
Ewan's
it that
just
way,
got
but
like
you're right.
he's just got like this great form to his swim, um that is in all three of those examples, right? But he busts in, and then he murders a stormtrooper
Oh yeah,
because he knocks that guy out and then leaves him face down in the water.
yeah.
I was like, that's a little harsh, Obi. We're yeah. I mean, like, I know he's a stormtrooper, but like these guys are just enlisted soldiers. They don't really know what they're doing. I guess they are the baddies though, but
Yeah, they
um,
get taken care of pretty quickly in that
yeah,
scene.
yeah.
Yeah,
but Tala's cover is almost blown, but then she manages it, and like there's sort of walking him through. It's getting him to where they're gonna have Leia, and
And
then
then, oh, sorry.
so go ahead. You go ahead. You go ahead.
I was going to say, this is around the time where it gets revealed to what is actually being held at the Fortress Inquisitorius behind those
Yeah.
red Imperial insignias. I didn't know if you were going to go down that path, but yeah, we see, presumably, there's definitely some Jedi just by identifying. But upon watching it again, because again, you get that perspective of actually seeing the entire show. Maybe some of these, you could think maybe in a flashback you see some of these other faces pop up and everything, but you're to my eyes, you really only get to see for sure two actual Jedi, and that the first one is obviously Terrace Nube and a
Yeah.
youngling. The
Yeah.
other characters, they could be Force wielders. I'm not saying that they couldn't be, but they're not that clear to me this time around. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely playing into the idea that like the Inquisitors are not just hunting down Jedi, but like any Force sensitives, right? And I think I think what happens is that the Jedi and Force sensitives get brought back to the fortress, and then it's like, well, can we break them? Can we make them Inquisitors, or
Mm,
and when they're not, when you're not able to, then they end up entombed, right, in this amber. uh, uh what is unclear to me is, are those people dead, or are they in suspended animation, right?
true.
um
Yeah, they look
and like
preserved.
that is a very interesting question. I It's been a while. Fallen Order's been out for a really long time. If you haven't played Fallen Order, you don't know the story. Sorry, I'm gonna spoil a little bit.
Not
Parts
Survivor
of
though,
the
right?
fortress get destroyed in that game,
Yeah.
and knowing now that there are like we knew that it was a prison, like that there was a prison level, because you go through the prison level in that game. That is the first time the fortress shows up, by the way, is in um, Fallen Order, right? It doesn't show up in Rebels. We never
No.
go to the Fortress Inquisitorius in Rebels.
We go to Mustafar, but in orbit. In the
Yeah,
season one finale. Jeez, I couldn't get that word out. Season one finale. We're on a Star Destroyer, and that's where the Grand Inquisitor, spoiler alert, meets his demise officially.
yeah, yeah. In reality, yeah.
In reality,
A few years from this, I yeah. So like this puts that in context. You're like, oh, I hope that either they are dead. I don't hope that they're dead, but I hope that they're not still alive, because then when part of the fortress gets destroyed, potentially some of them get killed. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's very unclear. It's left very, I think, intentionally vague. I think it's one of those things where we're meant to sort of look at it and maybe interpret a little bit. I I like it when Star Wars does not spell everything out.
me too.
I don't like it when they leave important pieces of plot on the table. But this is not an important piece of plot. This is a subplot. This is like a piece of window dressing all along the way to the actual plot. So for me, it's like I think it's really good the way that they handle this, because it gives us just enough that we go like, okay, what are these people here for, like what's going on. um and I could see them coming back to this later on, and it being like, well, like this was all like they were being kept in suspended animation because Palpatine is doing all sorts of experiments with the Force and cloning and midichlorians and genetics and whatnot, right? So he needs test subjects and he needs samples, and yeah, there's a like a possibility that like maybe Grogu was in like the fortress at one point, because we really don't know what happens to Grogu
Right.
from what we've seen in the series. We got a little bit of that filled in recently, and I don't want to spoil that in case people haven't watched all of season 3 of Mando yet. But it's not the whole story. Um, and it would make sense actually with the trauma and that sort of thing if something did happen to him and he did end up in the fortress at some point, I and then was freed from it at some point, right? So who knows? Maybe we'll see that in the
Yeah,
future. But
it could really go either way. I mean, my vote is probably that they are perished and they're just somehow preserved in a very horrific kind of way. However,
mhm,
if they are not, and that there is a way to kind of reanimate them or bring them back in some way, it'd be kind of interesting. If they were, eh, it could be a good kind of a way of calling back in the next show, Ahsoka, with Ray Stevenson's
yeah,
character and his apprentice. You know, that could be a possible plot point that they came from the Fortress Inquisitorius and they just finally turned. Again, just another potential possibility of storytelling. But overall, I think that they're gone because I can't imagine that youngling coming back.
yeah.
Personally, but yeah.
I mean, it's also a thing of like if they are in suspended animation and something, and like the fortress wasn't absolutely destroyed in Fallen Order, right? Um, which actually, I mean, like no, timeline wise, that happens before this,
Yeah, no,
right?
definitely.
Because this is
Yeah.
10 years. That's 5 years
hmm
after after the end of the Clone Wars, after
I thought
Revenge
it
of
was
the
just
Sith.
like a bridge that went underwater with Vader in Fallen Order, but
But yeah, but
I don't
there's
remember.
also like during the fight and stuff, there like there's that chamber and whatnot that is like
Mm,
underneath the fortress. So, like I think as they fly away, I think that there are like explosions and stuff by the fortress. But it's been a little while since I've played all the way through Fallen Order. So I don't remember it exactly, but I think so. But anyways, um, I don't know. It's one of those. I'm sure that somebody can look it up on Wikipedia and let us know. But it's not that important to what we're talking about right now.
no.
Um, Reva catches up with Tala, and there's the great scene of like, like what I think you're a spy, and she's like, yeah, I am a spy. It's like, of
Mhm.
course I'm a spy, and she does again. This is a callback to call forward, I guess, to the Last Jedi when Kylo Ren is like in his mind thinking like, oh, I'm turning my lightsaber towards my enemy, so that Snoke is like reading his mind and not understanding that like you are his enemy, not Rey, right? And he tricks
Right.
him, and it's a little bit of that sort of like it's a anti Jedi mind trick. This is one of those things where it's like Jabba in Return of the Jedi is like, oh, your mind tricks won't work on me. Oh, they only work on the weak minded. Um, this is one of those places where it's like this is why a Jedi mind trick wouldn't work on someone like Tala, is because Tala has the ability in her own mind to sort of like bend the truth in order to serve her, right? Like in order
Right.
to 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 trick Reva, because Reva's like, I can't get a read on it. You're definitely lying, but I don't know if you're lying to me or for me, right? Um, and so like there's a lot of great tension there. I Meanwhile, Obi-Wan, we get the great scene where the lights are out in the interrogation room, and
Yep.
and then we just get it lighting up when Obi-Wan ignites his lightsaber. Such a cool moment. He's almost like a monster from a horror movie for a second. But it's great because like where the stormtroopers are like, what's going on? Leia is like, oh, I'm rescued. But then they get spotted. The alarm goes off. Reva comes after them, but I don't know, like somehow or another they end up in that one hallway, and then he
It's
breaks
a very
the
action heavy episode, so it's kind of hard to like really talk about
yeah,
the nuances and whatnot. But real
exactly,
fast, before we move too far forward,
yeah,
going back to that scene in the darkness where it's like a horror movie. Um, so I wanted to talk about that scene very quickly because in the last like year or so when this came out, um, personally, like as an editor, I there's sometimes I like montages. I like to edit montages, whatnot. but like when it comes to like fan edits, I'm not the biggest fan of them. I like them for artistic experimentation, but I'm not really the
Mhm.
biggest fan of them. So for like example, the Star Wars scene 38 reimagined, not a fan of it. It completely misses the point. Kind of going back to what we were talking about with lightsaber battles, it's technically a better choreographed, but I wouldn't even say that because it's just so chaotic.
It's
Um,
fancier. It's
it
fancier. Yeah.
yeah,
I hate that. Like, because like you said, like it misses the point, right? Like it
it's
just absolutely
completely
misses the point of that fight between Obi-Wan and Vader.
exactly. Yeah, terrible. But I did see one. I did see a fan edit, and this had to have been a visual effects artist for sure. That, in my opinion, I don't know if you've ever seen it, and I got to find if I could find the link. I will let everyone know before the episode's over. But there is an actual edit that I saw where it's just as long as the scene needs to be. It's very quick, but the fan re animated the stormtroopers to actually and it's going to sound slightly grotesque, but it's actually more in line with Obi-Wan during the Clone Wars and the way he took out battle droids. But there is some dismemberment because
Hmm.
there is some moments in this scene, and it's not for lack of, I mean, it's not that Disney's afraid of, gore or whatnot. I mean, a stormtrooper just got cut in half by a gate, this an
Yeah.
episode ago. So but yeah, there was a couple moments, and the fan, if I find it, I'll give him some credit, but phenomenal job. It's subtle enough to where, like, did that just happen? So like there's it actually just makes the lightsabers actually feel more like an actual lightsaber would, where there's like, like an arm that gets cut and then the head just goes flopped,
Yeah.
and then again, it's not grotesque, it's the helmet, but it's just enough to be like, whoa, that actually I actually felt the lightsaber here, because there it does kind of feel like a little bit of a
Yeah.
illuminated baseball bat in this scene. But overall, I do love the way in the actual show, the way it's actually shown and the way it's colored and lit and
So
everything. But yeah.
yeah. So I saw a take on lightsabers a little while ago. I think it was on TikTok or something like that. I can't remember, so I can't really credit it, but it this really works for me. I like it a lot. Lightsabers visually are just like appear to just be a beam of light, right? And that beam, we think because the lightsaber is circular, that the blade is circular as well, that it's like a tube
Hmm.
of light, right? Um, but if you actually like pay attention to the way that lightsabers function in universe, it actually would make a lot more sense. And when you look at the way that they look visually in the first movie, you kind of get a little bit of a sense of this. And I like that that Rebels kind of brought this back, but not in exactly this way. But that there's like a regular sword, there's a flat edge and there's a cutting edge, right? And the difference between a fully trained Jedi who knows what they're doing with their lightsaber and someone like Luke picking up a lightsaber and never having really fought before is that like
Hmm.
Vader, every slice is on point. He knows the direction of his lightsaber. He understands it. He even though he can't visually see it, he can sense it. He can feel it. He knows where the cutting edge is and he knows where the blunt edge of it is. And so the blunt edge will do damage for sure, and it's corrosive, or not corrosive, but or like I don't know, it'll set something on fire.
Those
It's
torch, yeah.
definitely like scored. Yeah, like it's still a plasma blade, right? Like it is what it is. But I but it'll also glance off of things like armor. So the evidence to this, the main piece of evidence to this in the original trilogy is in the fight between Luke and Vader. Vader is cutting through everything in that fight. He slices everything clean through, right? Whether it's the tubes or like like those posts on like the weather vane, or like the gangway or whatever. Like
Hmm.
everything that he cuts straight through. Luke lands a hit on Vader's shoulder and it glances off of his shoulder, right? Like it bounces, like the lightsaber bounces off of his shoulder. And it's at that point where Vader stops toying with Luke and gets serious, right?
Right.
And chops his hand off. That shot, along with what Luke does with his lightsaber in Return of the Jedi when he's fighting guys, and it's like he's not dismembering people, but he is hurting them, right? And like he is like they are, for all intents and purposes, probably dead, right? But he's not going clean through them. The lightsaber is making contact, and even without armor, it's not going through these, like through flesh, right? Because he has no idea what he's doing. He can barely deflect bolts with it against the speeder bikes, right? Like,
Right.
and he gets a lucky shot off when he cuts the stabilizer off the front of it, sort of thing. Like Luke has no idea what he's doing with his lightsaber. He's not trained. And I love that because it makes a lot of sense, because everybody else we see with a lightsaber over the course of the series knows what they're doing, right? So if I were making a Star Wars, I would like canonize this. This would be a thing that like I put straight up into it, of like you don't know, like you clearly don't know what you're doing. And it's like a lightsaber like the dark saber then further reinforces that, because it like it's almost like it's not that the dark saber is a different shape from other lightsabers. It's because the colors are inverted. It's because it's the dark saber. It's just very apparent that it's a flat blade, right? And it is like the
Right.
construction wise, it is built a little bit different from a conventional lightsaber, but it's almost like the blade is, because it's dark, we can see the shape of it really clearly. Like we can see the shape of the actual blade, and then on top of that, it's almost like it's a fat, chunky lightsaber blade, anyways, because of the design of this of the lightsaber, right? But that like all lightsabers actually have this quality. We just can't tell because the brilliant white light of a standard lightsaber makes it really hard to see that. The prequels did a cool thing that like the tip of the lightsaber became pointed, right? Like a fencing foil. This is another one of those things that people don't know about swords, is that a fencing foil is actually not like a foil for like practice fencing is basically like a car antenna, right? Like an old like 1980s car antenna,
Right.
right? Where it's like it's a cylinder with a nub on the end of it. But an actual rapier blade, which is what a fencing foil is styled after, is a cutting blade. It's a diamond, right? It's a diamond that comes to a point at the very tip, but it is sharpened to a point at the very tip. Like it has the same shape as a traditional sword. It's just very, very thin and tapered, like very tapered. So it's a lot longer at the base than it is at the top, but so it all like it comes to almost like a perfect point at the top, but it is then cut like in that same sort of diamond fashion that you would consider like a traditional like long sword or short sword, right? So like I've always thought of like lightsabers are more like that, like a lightsaber, like when Obi-Wan says an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. Jedi lightsabers have this quality of like they are, and the prequels then reinforce that, of like they're pointed at the end, and it's like it's at the end where they're not as where the light's not as brilliant and they're not as powerful that we start to actually see the like the literal shape of it. The best example of this is in Revenge of the Sith when Mace is pointing the lightsaber at Palpatine. We see it super clear that like it comes to a pointed end. So I look at it and I go like, that's how it is. Obi-Wan hasn't used his lightsaber in forever. He might be a little bit rusty with it at this point still. He hasn't fully reconnected with who he is. He's getting there. He's very close, but it's um not until the conversation at the beginning of the last episode of the season that he really like that he becomes Obi-Wan Kenobi again, and that resolve comes back. But
Right.
we're close, right? So he does some cool stuff with his lightsaber, but also like I don't know. I like to think of maybe he's just a little bit rusty, and he's kind of, oh yeah, that's right. That's not the angle on this blade. It's been a long time, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Because that is one of those things that you would lose. You would lose that sense, right? Um,
yeah. I mean, and also, I mean, it works in the sense because too. I mean, the Clone Wars for years were against droids, battle droids, and whatnot. You know, this is actually humanoid um, people. You know, getting
yeah,
that he's fighting against now. So it's slightly different. It's not completely different, but slightly different. And I, while you were speaking, I took the liberty to just to make sure if anyone wanted to check it out. The YouTuber, his name is Pixel Joker 95. So if
okay,
you want to check it out, just to see what, and it's a 27-second clip. So the only reason why I was bringing it up is because I thought, since when it comes to action episodes, it's kind of difficult to kind of talk about, like, okay, well, this happened and then this happened, but I kind of
yeah,
thought that this would have been a perfect opportunity to kind of focus on something that delved into the action, but also about
no, for sure.
the quality of the lightsabers and everything. So it worked out.
Yeah. So eventually Tala and Obi-Wan and Leia all link back up, and then they collapse the one sort of bridge, and the water comes rushing through, whatever. It's a really great scene. But describing an action sequence in a podcast is such a waste of time. So we're not going to do that. It's cool though. Super cool. You guys have all seen it. You know, it's super cool.
The
Um,
sound design is fantastic in that scene too.
yeah,
Like,
with the
hear every
cracking of the
clap.
glass. Yeah,
Oh,
totally.
so good.
Um, they at some point they managed to like get a sort of disguise. I love this scene. This is so Star Wars to me when they're like just kind of
Me
trying
too.
to sort of walk out, and Obi-Wan's got this big trench coat on and the hat, and Leia is very clearly just like under the trench coat, walking with them, and they're
Perfect.
just trying to like fly casual, right? Um,
It's so good. People,
and it
this is
almost
the
works. If not for
yeah.
Reva, it would have worked.
This is the one of the scenes though that I heard some pushback, and it was like, really? Do you guys not understand Star Wars?
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
so Star Wars. This is
Yeah,
so Star Wars. This the
I'm sorry,
ridiculousness of
but
this moment.
yeah, this fits in perfectly with uh like it sitting in the cantina and this ridiculous music is playing, and Obi-Wan cuts a dude's arm off, and
Hmm.
then like we just go
Business as
back to
usual.
business. Like it's like, yep, that happened. And then later Han just like murders Greedo, and then he's just like, sorry about the mess, and tosses him a coin, and the music starts playing again, and it's just like that's it's silly. It's very silly. The whole thing is very silly, but it's Star Wars. It's not real. I hate that I have to say those words out loud to people, but I do have to say those words out loud to people that, like, hey guys, Star Wars is made up pretensies. It's faking in space is the common phrase, but I like to take it a step further and say, like, guys, it's silly playtime. Like these are action figures. They are like the characters are archetypes. They are heroes and villains, white hats and black hats. Like it's everything is heightened. The silly is also heightened from time to time. And to be honest, when it's not there, it's not Star Wars. It's not Star Wars. And like this is what I go back to with Andor. Andor is a really great Blade Runner TV show that for some reason has a Star Wars skin painted onto it, right? Like it is not it is Star Wars. I'm not saying that it's not Star Wars, but it lacks fundamental qualities of what is archetypically Star Wars, which is fine. That's fine. It can be that way. Young Jedi Adventures is the other side of the spectrum, right? Or like the Lego Freemaker Adventures, which I love so much. Some of my favorite Star Wars stories in Lego Freemaker Adventures. But like it doesn't take itself seriously. It's Lego, blah blah blah, right? good. The best Star Wars is very balanced on this stuff, and Obi-Wan balances it really well. But every once in a while, we got to get silly. Uh, in the last episode, we had a talking mole rat who was an Imperial sympathizer, right? Like a very like grounded story point coming through a giant mole rat man, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're taking this 100% seriously, there is something wrong with you. Like go to therapy. It's These are stories. They're for fun and to learn something. And then to take, I saw a video recently that somebody had shared, I think maybe on Twitter, of George Lucas talking about Star Wars and saying like that's, but the point of the story is not don't like it. You can like it and you can study it and you can learn it, but don't let it become everything. The purpose is to watch the story, to learn a thing, and then to go out into the world and have your own adventures. Right? That's the
Right.
lesson, is to not stay on the farm. It's to go out into the galaxy and make it a better place and have your own
Right.
adventures. Right? And to me, it's like when people get caught up on things like that, or they want to argue about, that Star Destroyer is too small, or that's not the way that weapon works, or that's not the way that the Force works, or that's not what Luke Skywalker would do. It's None of this is real, you guys. These are trappings to tell stories to make you a better person. That's why we tell stories, right? We tell
Mm-hmm.
these stories so that, you know, these heroes go on their journeys so that we can experience it through their stories, and then we don't have to put ourselves into mortal peril in order to learn these lessons, right? We can learn these lessons via these characters, become better people, and go out into the world and make the world a better place without actually having to risk our lives fighting evil, right? That's the purpose. That's the reason why we have mythology and why we have fairy tales and these types of stories. Like literally that's why we have these types of stories, is so that we can pass on information in a safe manner, and you don't have to go out and learn this stuff firsthand. Your father doesn't have to become Darth Vader and then you have to like fight him and get your hand chopped off in order to go through what Luke goes through. And that's the good stories, they take you there, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and so like Star Wars has all of that stuff, but then every once in a while Star Wars also wants to be silly, and I think that George built that in as that reminder. It's because people will go, oh, it takes me out of the story. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's the point actually. Like congratulations, you solved the riddle. It's like when Luke walks into the cantina and they're like, "Hey, we don't serve their kind here. Your droids have to wait outside." It's like, "What? Wait, what? Droids aren't allowed in the bar." Okay, whatever, right? And then he looks around the bar and it's like, oh, there's a wolf man and there's a thing, we're going to call it a hammerhead. And I'm pretty sure those are little bat people getting drinks at the bar, right? And like, well, what's this guy? He's like a spider walrus guy? I don't know. What's he supposed to be? Um and it's like it's all very very silly, and the band is these guys with these funny faces and they're playing these instruments and they're bopping around and the music is absolutely ridiculous. Like I love the Cantina song, right? Like I love that song, but like let's all be real for 1 second. It's obnoxious as hell, right? If you had to listen to that song on repeat for 5 hours, it would drive you insane.
Right.
um but it's meant to be silly and take you out of it and remind you like, oh, we are in another galaxy. Oh, this is a fairy tale, right? And if you're then like, well, stop going back to the same example. Okay, let's go to the next movie that George Lucas made and the next ridiculous wild thing that he decided. Obi-Wan says, you got to go to Dagobah. You got to learn the Force from a Jedi Master, the Jedi Master who instructed me, Yoda. And Luke gets there and he's like, man, I got to find this Jedi Master. I bet he's ripped. I bet he's shredded. I bet he's human. Right. And we're all sitting there going like, well, it's another Obi-Wan. He's sending him to another. Obi-Wan was obviously trained by a better Obi-Wan. That's what he just said. Right. And then Luke gets there. R2 gets eaten by a dragon snake and spit out. And everything's going wrong. And this little frogman with giant ears shows up and he's like, oh, your food is gross and I want to take your lamp. And it is completely absurd and totally ridiculous. And he's a puppet. He's a puppet, you guys. He's not a puppet. He's a Muppet because he is a Muppet. Jim Henson, Frank Oz, he's a Muppet. But he is not real. He is very obviously not real, but it doesn't matter because the story is true. Right? And let's bring it back into Indy. So the difference between fact and truth, right? The truth was that there was gold buried in the whatever, and the fact is that no, this was just a regular burial, right? He makes that point in 2 movies. He makes it in 2 different movies. Again, George Lucas makes this point in 2 different movies, 2 different Indiana Jones movies, both in Raiders when Indy's giving the lesson to his class, and then he reinforces it again in The Last Crusade about the the Grail story and everything, right? Learn these lessons, guys. George is being really, really clear with his storytelling, and through Lawrence Kasdan, even more so, right? Like they want us to learn these things. Please learn these things. Truth and fact are different. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Yeah, learn these things and have fun while doing it. While you're learning these archetypes and learning these lessons, you can have Chewbacca yelling and swinging in the ropes like Tarzan. It's silly. It's fun. Yeah.
Like it's silly, but it's silly not for silly's sake. And I think like that's one of the places where people get a little bit lost with Star Wars. And when they go like, when you talk to them about this and they go like, well, so it's just supposed to be silly sometimes. Like, no, it's supposed to be a fairy tale, and fairy tales are not real. We know that fairy tales aren't real. That's what makes them fun, right? When somebody is telling you a fairy tale, it's like, well, I've never seen a fairy, but boy, wouldn't it be neat if they existed, right?
Right.
Like that's the thing. And if we go back to like Greek myth, it's like, do we really, really believe that every Greek philosopher or like whatever in that time that was talking about all of these rational philosophical things was then also like a big man with a beard lives at the top of that mountain and shoots lightning bolts at us when he's angry, and that's why we have thunderstorms? I don't think that they did. I think that there were like stories to let people know, like, I mean, like there was superstition and stuff, and it was obviously because they didn't have science to back things up. There's a lot more like, oh, the gods are angry and that's why they're doing this. We got to blame it on something, right? Scapegoats. But did they really believe that that Zeus was sitting up on top of the clouds hurling lightning bolts down at them? I don't know that they did, but it sure is a good story, and it's a great way to get that across, right? And to say like, hey, voyages by sea are dangerous because Poseidon is angry and he doesn't like it when we take our boats out into the ocean, and that's why this happens. Which is really just the important part of that story is, if you're gonna go out to sea, do not take it lightly. It's very dangerous. That's the important part. And then Poseidon makes it an interesting story, right? An interesting story that I want to hear, and then I'll learn something from it instead of just being scolded and warned, don't go into the ocean unprepared, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. And that's what Star Wars is supposed to be doing too. That's what all of these modern mythologies, whether it's Star Wars or the MCU or DC or Fast and Furious, whatever it is, like pick your poison, it doesn't matter. Um, the the point of them is that they are supposed to be teaching us these lessons without us actually having to learn the lessons firsthand. All of that. And then George really, really wants you guys to understand that this is a pretend fairy tale in space. It's not science fiction. This is not 2001. This is not us going, but what if this is the way that things are, right? What if we got to this point and we had this type of space travel? That's not what we're talking about. A hyperdrive works the way that a hyperdrive needs to work when it needs to work that way. So if it makes sense that Woody from Cheers can go take a syringe and suck a little bit of magic juice out of the crystals and then inject it directly into the hyperdrive in order to make the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, then that's what it is, you guys. Like, stop trying to figure out Star Wars. I'll take it even a step further. Don't even try and figure out Star Trek, because that's not the point of that show either. Like, that's not, if that's what you're doing, I just think that you're missing the forest for the trees on this stuff. And if you're upset because Obi-Wan almost got Leia out of there by hiding her under a trench coat, then you really, really watched this episode wrong, because that's not what this episode was about. You know?
Well done bringing home.
Yeah. They almost get away. Reva shows up and is like, Obi-Wan, you thought you could get away. And she's very Reva about the whole thing. And but then the T-47s come whipping in, which got referenced earlier, and I love it because it's like they're not called snow speeders. In universe, they are T-47s.
Right.
And I such a great moment. It's such a great moment when the T-47s come in, because I love snow speeders so much. The design is, for my money, like top three original trilogy ship designs. It's like, we all know the X-Wing is number one, you guys. We all know it. But the T-47 airspeeder, adapted for the cold, otherwise known as the snowspeeder, is such a great design. And we've only really ever gotten to see them in Empire Strikes Back, and the technology was limited at the time, and gets it across. They're awesome in Empire, right? But seeing one like whip in the way that they do and sort of like hover in the way that they do, just so great. So great. So I can't remember the other character's name. I remember Wade because he dies. Sully, is that the other?
Perhaps. Yeah. I wrote down Wade because I have something to say about him, but and those about the T-47s, the sound effects, the sound of those snow speeders, or they're fantastic. I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned that, because
it's so nostalgic, right?
It's so nostalgic. It's part of one of my favorite ship sounds, next to the Slave One, or the fire spray is what we're supposed to call it now. But great sound design.
Yeah. Obi-Wan, Tala, and Leia get Maya is the name of the actor, Sully's T-47, and start to take off. But Wade comes in, sort of cover them. And then when he tries to make his escape, Reva chucks a box at his airspeeder and it goes down. It crashes. R.I.P. Wade. But he had to save the day, so that our heroes could get away. And then we're sad on the ship, and then the episode's done. No, then not the episode's done. Then Vader is like, I told you what would happen if you failed me. And then Reva's like, I didn't fail you. I put a tracker on them. They're gonna lead us right to the path. And then Vader's like, oh, maybe I underestimated you. He says a bunch of very Vader stuff. The lines are so well written. And then we get the reveal that it is Lola. Lola is the tracker. And she's gonna lead the Empire right to the path in the next episode. It's so much suspense.
How about that Leia and Kenobi end moment where they just look at each other and they hold her hand, and that's one of my favorite Vivien Lyra Blair moments of the show. It's just there's no dialogue. It's just her
Yeah.
just her calmness, her stillness in that moment is purely just perfection in that scene. But yeah, that's I mean overall that's the episode. This is the shortest episode of the series.
Hmm.
This is the one that I definitely felt that could have been longer personally. Just like little moments, like I wanted to get to know Wade more. Like I didn't. It was very evident this last time watching it that when they had that sad moment on the ship, where I mean, I get it, he died. I wanted to know maybe more about him. I mean, there's a part of me that I would love to have seen a little bit more of the path before we go into the fortress. Um, I kind of missed, and it could have been a 30-second scene, but if there was a moment where he got out of that tank and actually actively picked or chose Jedi robes, that would have landed
Mm.
with me a little bit more, because he does kind of pop in with like, oh, that's Kenobi right there, in that moment, and it took me not took me out of it, but there was definitely one of those moments where like I wish that there was there's certain moments in shows and films that garner kind of a moment to like an entrance or something, and that could have been a moment where we could have just taken pause for just a second to like acknowledge like he's actually actively choosing to like walk down this path, and you could have done that visually. No dialogue didn't need to be, but I don't know. What did you think? Would you want more out of this episode in terms just of length, for not just for length purposes, but for story, for character to kind of like land these moments home, like even with Roken, that quick 180 that we kind of talked about earlier. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in the overall pace of the show, it's fine. It is very action heavy. It's maybe like the most action heavy episode, um, like sort
But
of
so much, but like so
from
much
end to end.
happens though. Yeah,
But
because so much happens.
yeah.
It establishes that not only is Leia captured, but we have to also have these interrogation moments, all the while
Hmm.
Tala and Obi-Wan actually not only get to the fortress, but try to find Leia, get her out of there, and then establish that the rebels are actually, or the members of the path are going to save them, and then actually care about the character. That's a lot to pack into 30 some odd minutes.
Yeah, I don't know. For it works for me. It works fine for me. I mean, like I would always want more. That's why I like the comic. I'm like, okay, cool. If it's gonna give us more, then I'm down for it.
Totally.
And it's Obi-Wan. You give me more Obi-Wan, I'm gonna be happy. But I don't know. I it didn't bother me. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. But yeah, overall, can't wait to talk about the next two episodes, because this is when we're starting to wrap things up. And
Oh yeah. Now it's like serious business, right? These last two episodes are gonna be a little crazy. So yeah. Awesome. Uh, I think like we did it. We made it through the episode. It is very late now as we are recording this, so it's time to wrap it up. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Marty, for joining me as always. Yeah, I hope that everybody's enjoying our Obi-Wan retrospective. I know that I am enjoying going back through the series. Just revisiting it and enjoying it again for I don't even remember how a third or fourth time. Um, but yeah, we'll be back next week with part 5, and then the following week with part 6, and then we'll be done. That's it. We're more than halfway through our journey back into Obi-Wan. Again, thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
take care.
Thank you for listening to Thunderquack Force Perspectives. Our opening theme is composed for us by Christy Carew. Follow Force Perspectives on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ForcePOV, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/discord. Support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/thunderquack to get early access to episodes, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast service, or buy merch at store.thunderquack.com. Force Perspectives is a part of the Thunderquack Podcast Network.